All right. Good morning and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development's third installment in the Setting Your Price for Your Food Product series. My name is Jeff Fiddick. I'm a business development specialist with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development's Food and Agri-Product Processing branch. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the GoToWebinar question tab, and then we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, the earlier parts of this series are available on Manitoba's YouTube channel. Part 1 of this series demonstrates in detail how to determine your food product's cost of goods, wholesale selling prices for various channel partners, and retail selling price. Part 2 demonstrates how to use an automated costing and pricing tool that was developed by Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. This tool is freely available to you if you'd like to try using it. This part here, part 3, will get you thinking about the why or the strategy behind setting your prices, plus where and how to position your product in the minds of your customers. So let's get to it. So in terms of the context of this discussion, we're going to be talking about a strategy for your pricing that is directed at the consumers in a retail grocery store setting. So get your mind around that in terms of that's who we're talking about and the setting and what we're talking about. So pricing strategy is not just the price you choose to sell at. I've had business plans submitted to me, and in the pricing strategy part, people say, well, I'm going to charge $1.99 for my product. That is not a strategy. That says nothing about the reasoning or the why behind why you've chosen to price that, the product in that fashion. Your pricing strategy defines how you're going to behave in the market. So it's a plan, it's a blueprint in terms of how you're going to position yourself, how you're going to behave in that marketplace. So there's a couple of things that your pricing strategy needs to be. It needs to be profitable. You need to be constantly making money on your product. So the notion of lost leaders and giving your product away to drum up sales is not a realistic proposition, especially if you only have one product or a limited line. Giving away something isn't going to be sustained by the rest of your sales if you have any other sales. It needs to be sustainable. So this is part of being profitable. It needs to be a good, consistent, solid strategy that will last over time and will help sustain and grow your business. Your pricing strategy needs to be flexible in that you don't want to just go to market with your absolute best bare bottom price and then have no room for negotiation. You have no room to offer a promo or a deal. Your hands are tied. You're kind of stuck in terms of just offering only that best price that you've come to market with. And finally, your pricing strategy needs to be realistic in that it needs to be realistic relative to the market, what the market will bear, what customers think your product is worth, as well as relative to competitors. I'm not saying let your competitors dictate your pricing, but you need to be in the realm of realism in terms of your price relative to competitor prices. Something about your pricing strategy, there's all sorts of products in a section that you may want to be competing in. You want to focus on competing with the products that are similar to your own. There are going to be all sorts of products in there that really are not your competition because there's a whole different consumer who's going to be buying those products. You want to use a value-based pricing based on what you think your product is worth or what the market will bear. You want to use your pricing to position your product in the minds of your customers. That's the whole price quality kind of relationship. So therefore, you want to set a higher everyday price so that there's room to offer promotional discounts. Like I mentioned, this is part of it being flexible in terms of allowing you the latitude to vary the price and still be making money. And finally, you want to validate that you're making a sufficient profit. So if you were to look at our first pricing workshop, we talk about how to set your price. What I suggest is that you look at what the market will bear. Let's come up with a price. Actually look at your product and say, what do I think this product is worth? What's the most I can get for this product? And then to set that price, and then to work backwards and validate that you're making enough profit. In my experience in the grocery industry, you're better off having a slightly higher everyday price, as I mentioned, because it gives you the flexibility to offer promotions or features that are going to help drive customer trial and drive your customer to stock up, to buy a couple extra if they like the product. This is referred to as a high-low pricing strategy. So high being the everyday price and the low representing the promo opportunities you may provide. A feature is great because it provides a special tag on the shelf that's going to draw attention to the product. A feature will also provide justification for you to ask the grocer, the owner of the grocery store, the manager, to ask for off-shelf or in display space. Here's just an illustration. This is a HABA or health and beauty aid section photo from a Safeway. And you take a look at the section, and what really pops, I'm sure, what's really drawing your eye is those 3 yellow tags. And you'll notice that the rest of the section is pretty nicely faced, doesn't look too beat up at all. The products that are on some sort of promotion, some sort of price deal, are quite sold down. So obviously it's working in terms of drawing attention to those things. One thing I've noticed too from my experience is there's actually kind of a proximity effect too, is that the items adjacent to a product may also enjoy a little bit of a lift. Just because consumers are drawn to that section, they may see other alternatives within that section that may not be on sale, then they may enjoy a lift as well. So if you've studied any sort of marketing books or looked online to kind of figure out, well, what kind of pricing strategies are out there? What are the experts recommending? Here are some of those that I've come across, and just want to quickly talk to them, speak to them in terms of how effective or whether they're viable for your situation. So cost plus pricing essentially means you would take your costly goods and you would add some markup amount to it, and that would be your price. And again, if you refer back to our first worksheet or our first workshop on pricing, I speak quite a lot about how this is a terrible way to do your pricing. It's totally ineffective because there is nothing out there that says what is the magic amount that we add to our cost. Plus, this is totally focused on us, but we know as marketers that we really should be focusing our attention on the market, on the consumers we want to be purchasing our product. And therefore we look and say, well, what is the most they're willing to pay for our product? And that is what we use to inform our pricing. So this, and also in our industry, we use a gross margin, which is a function of the retail selling price. So we set a gross margin target for ourselves as a wholesaler. We know what kind of gross margin targets the retail grocers need, and we have those numbers to work with, and therefore use that as a more logical way to set our price. So that one gets an X. Competitive pricing, well, as I've alluded to, this is a bad idea as well, because essentially this is saying follow the market, do whatever your competitors are doing, and really essentially let them tell you what your pricing strategy is, or tell you what your price is going to be. Your competitors may have very different objectives than you do, so it's really dangerous to be following the market and just blindly following them. In my opinion, your best way to compete is based on your product, based on the service, those kind of unique things that you have. And price competition is not a sustainable, effective way to base your competitive posture. That one gets an X. Price skimming. This is one where you set a higher price and then you, to kind of skim off the product, the profits, as the name suggests, and then maybe over time you might lower it as demand decreases. This is something that maybe is appropriate for something like bulk products, maybe in markets where this is like a specialty product or something like that. I really don't see this being a viable option in our sector, so we'll X that one. The opposite is penetration pricing. This one here, you set a low price to enter a competitive market with the hopes that you can raise it later. A couple things wrong with this one is that if a market is really price competitive, it's probably not a good idea to jump in there. With the kind of products that our sector may be creating with local production, that sort of thing, I don't think you're necessarily ready to be jumping into a fight based on price. And again, if your sole main point of differentiation is price, that's a tough battle to win, especially if you've got entrenched competitors who have probably bigger capacity, lower costs. It's just going to be really hard to sustain that. Further, if you're penetrating, you're making a really low margin. That's not really sustainable. And to have the hope that someday you're going to finally make some margin, we don't know when that day is, again, isn't really a great plan. So we'll X that one too. Okay, you know I like this one because I've already mentioned it. So value-based pricing. This one is where we set a price based on how much the customer believes your product is worth. So essentially what the market will bear is what I call it. And the best way to figure out what that is do some testing at farmers markets. Because you can change your price, you can change your pack size, you can try different things, change different variables, and then get a sense as to what customers are willing to tolerate in terms of pricing. It's also a great place to try different promo features. So there we go. One of the 5 are good ones to follow. So my recommended pricing strategy for you, I would characterize it as value-based, as we just mentioned, and high-low. And what that means is value-based is your competitive advantage will be based on the strengths of your product. It's, you know, what cool flavors is it? What kind of ingredients? Are they natural? Are they organic? Production methods, all those other things that your product has going for it are going to be your competitive advantage. And you know, you may be price competitive, but that's not your main focal point. It's the product. You're going to determine what the market will bear for your product, and you're going to charge the maximum that you can. The high-low part means that you're not going to market with an everyday low price or EDL. Your everyday price is going to be the higher price that the market will bear, and assuming you're making an acceptable margin at that point. But you've allowed yourself some room in your margin to offer occasional promotional discounts to the trade, which are then going to be passed along to consumers. So as part of our strategy, we also want to outline what kind of objectives we have for ourselves. So we've got 4 of them here. So to position the product in the minds of your customers, it's that whole price quality relationship. We want to maximize profit. That's extremely important. And you want to provide an opportunity to induce customer trial. And in last order of importance is to be competitive. Yes, we should be cognizant that we're competitive, but let's not let that dictate our entire pricing strategy. So let's go through these in a little bit more detail. So in terms of positioning your product, positioning refers to how your product is perceived by consumers relative to alternatives in the section. It may be very different for different people based on what we're bringing to the table in terms of past experiences, our exposure to different brands, our exposure to different products, our color preferences, our packaging preferences, like all these other things. So it's a complex thing to visualize, but it is a consumer's perception. So groups of consumers may use one or a few attributes to tell them apart, and certain groups of consumers may use similar alternatives. So people in, let's say, baby boomers who are maybe a certain age cohort, certain gender, certain income, you can whittle it down in terms of like-minded groups who might look at certain attributes. This is where market research might be helpful, where you can get a hold of some market research and get a sense as to these different groups and what they're looking for, and then it would help you to hone in on who your potential customer is and how that person thinks. And of course, in terms of the positioning, you might have people will maybe use 2 different variables in terms of making a decision, 2 or 3, mostly 2. Price is definitely going to be one of those variables, though, and you know, as well as something else, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the price quality establishes a position in consumers' minds in terms of like a relative weighting or relative how much is this one better than this other one. And if you think about yourself as a customer in a store and you're standing in front of a jam section, and you've got one big container for this price and a smaller container for another price, and you're kind of looking at them and weighing the alternatives in terms of which is the better value for you for your needs. A lot of consumers may associate high price with better quality. They associate with something being homemade. They may associate with being organic, with being better production or processing methods, maybe with having a clean label in terms of simpler ingredients. One thing that's interesting I read though is that the Gen Zs have a very different expectation insofar as they expect even lower priced alternatives to have excellent quality. So that's an interesting thing. That is a bit of a shift insofar as consumer behavior and how that evolves over time with different generations. Of course, the look of your product needs to be reflective of the correlation. So if you're charging a premium price, your packaging has to be nice. It has to fit that price story. Whereas if you've got like a cheap or a beat up looking package, kind of an unimpressive looking label or what have you, then that doesn't necessarily match with commanding a premium price. Another thing too, in terms of positioning, is you need to determine which products on that shelf in that category are and are not your competitors. And you can largely do that simply by looking at the brands that are in the section. So competitor brands can be grouped in three groups here. So there's national brand, private label, niche, specialty, and foreign brands. Niche is essentially another word for specialty or for a particular group of consumers, some sort of special need, might be some particular sauce, might be some sort of topping for some very specific dish or something like that. So that idea. So in terms of national brands, those are characterized as being a high quality product. They've typically been around for a pretty long time, so they've built up what's called a lot of brand equity, meaning that people know them, they're familiar with them, they're inclined to trust them. Of course, they're going to command a premium price because they do have this brand equity, and that's also necessary because the national brands typically do advertising and promotions, and they have higher marketing budgets, and therefore that's part goes into the higher price. They're familiar, they're trusted. Typically, you'll have one or two national brands dominating a category. So if you think of like the cereal category, of course, you've got Kellogg's and Post, but then there's, let's say, maybe another 4 other vendors, 4 other brands that are in there that are maybe carving out a little bit of shelf space. In the bread category, you've got Dempster's as a national brand. And then, of course, there's all sorts of local brands. You've got Cub Bakery, you've got City Bread, you've got even the in-store bakery, all these other different brands that are in that section. So, all right. In terms of private label, this can be divided into white label and black label. So private label, white label, this is kind of the original one that came along. These brands are owned by the grocery chains, and they'll typically, well, they are a name that is not reflective of the grocery chain. This way, this brand can be across multiple banners. So for instance, the No Name brand, of course, is from the Real Canadian Superstore, but that chain also has the Real Canadian Wholesale Club. They have Extra Foods. They have No Frills. They have Loblaw stores. So all these different store brands can all have the same, what used to be a generic brand, hence the No Name, and is now actually a registered, not now, it's always been a registered trademark, and it is associated with being a discount, probably low quality. I've heard comments where people say, oh, it's not very good, but at least it was cheap. These are meant to undercut the national brand, and they're widely promoted by the store chain, so that gives them an advantage because they don't necessarily have to make the big investments in advertising and promotion because they can do it themselves. They can promote themselves, including giving themselves lots of shelf space. These ones transcend all the categories or various categories. So, across cereal, condiments, beverage, health and beauty aids, everything. The Signal brand, Probably haven't seen a lot yet. This one is owned by Sobeys, so we should be seeing that one in Safeway coming soon. Of course, Great Value is associated with Walmart. Now, private label, Black Label, also owned by the grocery chains. And what this is this is essentially a value-added version of the private label. So what they're looking to do is they're competing directly head-to-head with the national brands. So the quality is going to be the same as the national brands, or consistent with it. And they're price competitive with national brands. So they're not going like totally really low price, like half the price of a national brand like the white label. They're going maybe some smaller percentage cheaper than the national brands. Now these ones too are also familiar and trusted because they've been around a while. We've seen lots of marketing with them. They have had good quality, so if we purchased them, we've had good experiences with them. President's Choice even is in the financial sector. I think it's one of the more dominant brands in that sector, just because of the store penetration and the of their owners. So we have Compliments, which is Safeway, Sobeys, Kirkland, which is Costco, and PC, which is the other chains I mentioned. Now the niche, specialty, or foreign brands, these ones are very different. They're owned by food processing companies. So this would be where your product fits in. They're high quality, unique flavors, special uses. They're value or premium priced. So they're probably going to be higher priced than national brands. Part of that is maybe because they're not cranking out the kind of tonnage that a national brand would be. These are going to be smaller volume producers typically. They're typically going to be familiar only to a limited audience, so specific consumers. You're going to have very different brands by category. These ones are not going to transcend multiple categories. As I mentioned, this is where you should be positioning your brand and your products. So this is going to include other local brands. So that's going to be part of your competition in this space. It's going to be novel, unique items. It's going to be imports from foreign countries, and it's going to be imports from other places in our country, and it's going to be American regional brands. And I would make the distinction between American regional brands and national brands as being the ones where they may be very popular in a certain market within the United States, or maybe even national status or close to it in the United States, but for some reason haven't necessarily achieved national recognition in Canada. So I always like to use the mustard category. It's got all sorts of cool different shapes and sizes and colors. So here's an example of the niche, specialty, and foreign brands in that category. So just all sorts of different alternatives here in terms of what is going to make up that part of the business to go after. So one thing I personally find helpful is that when you stand in front of a busy grocery section, it's got all these different containers and sizes and price points, is to kind of get a sense as to what does this section look like in a different perspective in terms of weighing certain attributes against the price or the value proposition. So with that, we've got a positioning chart. This is a marketing tool that is helpful in creating a visual so we can kind of help tell the story or understand the story that a section is telling with the products and their various associated value propositions. So price is very important. So let's start with price. So if we make that our horizontal axis, and essentially the leftmost side of the line is going to be a low price. The rightmost side of the line is going to be a high price. So if we were to position products along there, we would move them along this line. Now, if we were to actually take products and plot them along this chart, you're not just going to want to take the retail. So you don't want to just say, well, put $4.99 over here and $4.49 here and $5.99 up here, because you need to normalize these amounts, or you need to convert them to some common denominator. So what you can do is you take the retail price point and the size of this product. So let's say we have a product that's $4.99 and the size is 300 milliliters. Then the price per 100 millimeters is $1.66. So that's simply taking $4.99 divided by 300 times 100, and you get this. So the one that is the second lowest price point actually turns out to be the second most expensive. So you can't just look at the price points, you got to look at the value proposition, and that's the conversion. So we actually see that the one with the highest price point is the best or the lowest price per 100 milliliter. So it is the, so we make our axis to be, let's say, from $1 per 100 milliliter up to $2 per 100 milliliter. And then we could plot these products along this chart based on that. Now for a vertical axis, this can really be anything. You know, and I think it's whatever is meaningful in this particular category. So it might be the most healthy product versus the least healthy. And this is obviously going to be a very subjective kind of a ranking. You could maybe create some sort of a scoring system or something like that. When I do this, I just kind of eyeball it and just kind of plot it, you know, just roughly, just to get a sense. So it might be natural versus artificial ingredients, might be some sort of allergen claims, or just in terms of what products are going to market with, what are they hanging their hat on, in terms of what is the main thing that they are focusing on, and therefore what kind of consumer are they going after. So you may find that a lot of competitors are going in a certain direction. Well, you could choose to follow them, or maybe there's another direction you want to go to stand out for the people who aren't being identified by these other competitors. So in terms of, so your axis is going to go from the most of something, so the most healthy, down to the least of something, so the least healthy. One that I found works helpful, and I like this for a lot of different categories, and I think it makes sense when thinking about local products, because locally made products tend to be unique insofar as having different ingredients, more exotic flavors, more complex flavors, that sort of a thing. And that seems to be a great differentiating factor between other items on the shelf. So if we were to make our vertical axis most exotic flavor down to conventional flavor, and then we're going to plot these so that we're going to end up with 4 quadrants here as a result. So what this gives us is exotic. So in the upper left-hand corner, exotic flavor at low price. So this makes sense because we're high in the exotic flavor side of the vertical axis. We're low on the price part of the axis. Over to opposite side, over on the right upper quadrant, it's still exotic flavor because we're still at the top of the exotic flavor axis, but we're now at the high price or the premium price side of the price line. If we go directly below it, now the flavor has dropped. It's lower, so it's more conventional flavor, but we're still in the high price quadrant. And then finally over to the lower left quadrant, the flavor is still going to be conventional there, and it's going to be a low price. So just to put these in perspective, let's just go and have a little bit of a chat about these. So, and also to assess whether your product would fit or should fit in any of these quadrants, and which quadrant it might fit in. So exotic flavor at low price. You may remember when we talked about the different brands that are out there, I didn't really talk about anything that was you know, a special or exotic kind of flavor and being at a discounted price. And the reason being is because it's not really a deliberate decision when a product ends up in this quadrant. Because you think about it, it's expensive to make an exotic product. Like you may have 10 ingredients that are expensive in there, and maybe the process is going to be cottage scale process. So therefore, it's not going to be the most cost-effective kind of alternative. So therefore, first of all, why would you want to sell a special exotic product at a low price? You wouldn't, because you're not going to make any money. So what typically ends up in this quadrant is something where it likely started out in the upper left-hand quadrant as maybe something novelty or niche, and they're trying to sell it at a premium price. But due to the passage of time, it may shift over to having to be at a low price. So an example of this is like a novelty cookie that was particular for the fall market or the Halloween, Thanksgiving kind of season. And now we're after Thanksgiving, where the season has lapsed. So now you can see the product is being sold for less than half its regular price. So that kind of tells me they're just trying to make it, convert this to money, kind of blow out the rest of that stock. Another example, another novelty cookie post Thanksgiving. So where someone is long on stock, so they ordered more than they anticipated, or maybe the product just didn't take off in the first place. We bounce down to the conventional flavor at a high price. This would be a sweet space to occupy because if you're offering a conventional flavor, it means that you're not spending a lot on expensive, fancy ingredients. And if you can get a high price, that'd be absolutely wonderful. Now, the only catch is that this space is typically operated or filled by these products here. So these known national brands. And the challenge is that it would take a lot of work to convince a consumer to switch from their known and trusted Heinz ketchup to your brand of ketchup. And even if you're offering the same price, it's a tough space to try to occupy, because this consumer is so entrenched, they're so loyal, they're pretty much going to remain a consumer of these products, of these brands. Okay, next one we can look at is conventional flavor at a low price. So this is another one where it's like, well, conventional product would be cheap to produce. We wouldn't necessarily want to sell it at a low price, and because the margins aren't going to be there, but maybe there's volume to be had. Again, the challenge with this one is that this space is also owned by someone else. This is where you're going to find your private label products, particularly your white labels, probably more skewed to the left side of the price spectrum, and then your black label closer to the center of the spectrum, and the product variety or whatever, it might be a little bit higher on the scale. So these ones are going to be very difficult to compete with, because these are going to be very high volume producers. They're going to have massive factories that are pumping out millions of units, and it's going to be very cost effective for them to do that, but it's not necessarily a space that you would be able to occupy. So we've kind of nixed out 3 of these areas. So fortunately, there is a spot left for you, and that's in the upper corner here. So the exotic flavor at a premium price. And that's kind of what I've alluded to insofar as the specialty or the niche kind of brands and where they fit into this scheme of things. So you're going to have more exotic flavor. It's going to be a premium price relative to the national brands. And the thing too is that the space on a grocery shelf is extremely limited. You may see some product that's got multiple facings, maybe like 5 of them are going, oh, well, we'll just cut that down and make room for my product. Well, it probably has those number of facings for a good reason. Either someone paid for it, or it's selling that well that it needs that kind of space. But the main point is that there's not an empty space waiting for your product. You got to try and squeeze in there somehow. So therefore, you may need to look at what kind of products are there that maybe can go that we can encourage the retailer to get rid of to make room for your product. So looking back at these in the mustard section, looking back at these various alternatives here, and assessing, well, which ones could we target? If you look at the detail in terms of which ones are from where, the foreign imports might be a good one because they might have a disadvantage because of higher transportation costs. That might make, assuming the retailer is going to take their full margin, that could make their price quite high. Also, too, is there any chance they have local representation? Probably not. That's an advantage you do have that you bring to the table, because if you're selling to stores in Winnipeg and Brandon, wherever in Manitoba, this province is your backyard. You can be in any of these stores in pretty regular fashion and out servicing these brands quite well. So that's an advantage that you can bring. One of these is from Quebec. I would probably avoid that one because it's going to be a local product from Quebec, just as a courtesy to another local vendor, so that if you ever wanted to go to that market, you're not going to be met with any huge animosity for kicking them out, trying to kick them out of our market here. So you can also look at the flavors and say, oh, there's a flavor here that has kind of the same products or the same flavors or the same ingredients as one of our varieties. Maybe we target that one. And you're not necessarily going to take it out on price. You can take it out on the fact that this is local. It's going to appeal to local Manitoba consumers, and of course, you can service it better. So just some different thoughts in terms of looking at that shelf space, identifying the low-hanging fruit in terms of where space might be made for you. And typically, when you look at a section, it's going to be that top shelf. And that's not a great place to start, but it's a start. It gets you on the shelf, gets you in the store, gets you official vendor status. So then you can start selling. Okay, so in terms of our recommended pricing strategy and the objectives, so we just spoke to number one, the position, to position your product. So in terms of maximizing your profit, like I said, you want to charge what the customer will bear. You want to test the limits of how high your price can go. I always contend that the best place to do this, to figure this out before you start talking to retailers, is do it at farmers markets, because you can have all sorts of latitude and trying different pack sizes, different amounts in a package, in a jar, trying different price points. You can even vary it by day, for different markets. And if you're challenged on it, it's just like, well, you're just kind of testing the market. You're trying to see what is the best price and what resonates with consumers. Like I say, I always start high. It's a lot easier to start too high and bring the price down. And you want to do it in such a fashion that it doesn't show desperation. You try a high price and then come back next week and then try a lower price, and don't necessarily indicate that it's been marked down. If you do start a little on the low side and you need to increase it, I've found that the easiest way to do that is after a feature. So if you're at $7.99 and you want to get to $8.99, I'd probably drop it to $6.99 for a promo, and then I'd bounce it back up to $8.99. And you see that with gas pricing all the time, where the price will drop, and then it'll go back. I'd say back up, but it actually goes up higher than where it originally started. And somehow in there, we seem to forget that it was cheaper before the price war, or before the prices dropped. So that is an effective strategy. I've used that a lot in my retail days. Again, in terms of maximizing your profit, unlike direct selling, when you're selling to the trade, so the trade is retail grocery stores, wholesalers, those kind of people who are going to resell your product, you've got a lot less flexibility in changing your regular prices from time to time. So when you're at a farmer's market, you could change it multiple times a day if you felt like it. But when you're selling to wholesalers, you kind of want to get it right for at least the next year. You don't want to be coming to them with incessant price increases, because it takes them work as well to put the price increases through, and they don't like increasing their retail shelf prices any more than you do. So it's kind of a once a year kind of a thing, and you got to be prepared to justify it. One thing I've always found too is that odd numbers, weird numbers are more credible than even numbers. What I mean by that is, don't go to them and say, I need a 5% increase. 5% is very suspicious. It's like, really, your calculations actually worked out to 5% even. If you went to them with a 4.8% increase or a 5.3 or something like that, some weird number like that is going to be a heck of a lot more credible and more justifiable right out the gate than if you started with some even number. And I'll suggest that later on too in terms of the actual pricing that you set. Weird numbers are more credible. So our third objective is in terms of providing an opportunity for inducing trial. So this is by your retail customers. So if you give your customers a bit of a deal, if you offer the retailer a deal who passes it on to the customer, that'll help give you a little bit of a lift. So again, imagine if you're on that top shelf of the section, you'll get a bit of a boost from that. But if you combine it with sampling, of course, that's off the table right now, just insofar as the pandemic. But should that come available, or we think of some way to innovate and get sampling back on the table, sampling price plus a price discount is going to help you create even a larger lift to your sales. And of course, I argue that if you're doing a promo, that's a justification to ask for an off-shelf or an end display, especially if you're doing some sort of in-store demonstration. You absolutely need to have an off-shelf or a end display, just so that the product is right there. And when you make your pitch to the customer, they can instantly decide and they can instantly reach into the display and grab a couple. So that's key there. And of course, that personal selling combined with the promo discount is really going to help create incremental lifts over and above just the basic price drop. An interesting point too is that the discount that is provided to a consumer is not all on you. The retailer is willing to make a little bit less profit on an item during a promotion as well. So that's helpful. And then finally, our last objective is to be competitive. So like I said, this is the lowest priority because I think there's a lot of other more empowered things you can be doing to set your price and inform the way that you're going to market and dealing with the market. And like I said, you need to own your own pricing strategy. Don't just be a follower, but set your own pricing strategy, do your own thing. Because you may have a different cost structure, you may have different objectives, you may have a different product than your competitors. And as an example, let's say you're at a farmer's market and you've got a competitor, someone who's selling the same thing as you. They may be blowing their product out, and the last thing you want to do is let that panic you and drop your prices, because that person may have some sort of a problem with their product, or maybe there's a missing ingredient, there's a fault with it or something. They're going to just sell them off at a cheap price. If you just reacted to that, you're going to be selling a perfectly good product at a discounted price for no good reason. Like I say, pricing should not be the thing that you hang your hat on. It's not a competitive advantage, because chances are there's competitors out there who have cheaper, lower cost of production, who can outprice you. Okay, so we've talked to our objectives here. And I already mentioned this, but I'm just going to throw this out there again. Is another strategic consideration, and this is strategic, like I said, is just insofar as when you set your wholesale selling price, avoid even numbers. I've seen a lot of information from clients where they seem to glom onto these even numbers, like a wholesale price of $2.50 for a unit. as a wholesale price. And again, I look at that as a former category manager, and I'm kind of suspicious of it because it's just like, that's kind of odd that it should just land there. Maybe it should be cheaper. That's the way the mind of a grocery executive would go, is to think, like, I should probably get a discount of that because that doesn't look like a real price. So if you charge a weird number like 251, so even if it works out to 250 and it's you know, the honest to goodness actual price that you calculated, make it weird. So make it 251, make it 252, 253, etc. This will also avoid even case prices. The problem with even numbers is they're too easy to remember. They're also really hard to change because what are you going to do if you're at 250 and you like even numbers and you need to do a price increase? Do you go to 260? Do you go to 255? Like what number do you go to that provides a sufficient increase that is justifiable and then suits your even pricing need? So like I say, it's something to just avoid. And when you're dealing with wholesalers, it is much more credible if you have weird numbers. So as illustrated in the chart here, if you've got a case of 12 and then at this unit price, you get 30 bucks even. And like I say, that's really hard to change. People remember that, it sticks in their mind, especially at, you know, if that's the price for a year or 2 years. But if you make it a weird number, then it's so much easier to change. All right, so that is our discussion about pricing strategy. And now I'll ask if there's any questions that we can answer for you.
So I don't have any questions currently, Jeff. If anyone on the line has any questions, please use the questions tab, and you're certainly welcome to type it in there. If a question comes in later, I can certainly email that to Jeff.
Sure.
Right. So I don't see anything currently, Jeff.
Okay. Well, like I say, here is my, yeah, I guess they can contact you, Laurie. Here's my coordinates as well. And
okay.
As I mentioned, the first two workshops on pricing are available on Manitoba's YouTube channel. So if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of how to determine your cost of goods and the right way to do that, as well as the way to build in what are called program monies or inside monies, that's all explained in the first workshop. And then the second workshop helps automate that process for you, because there is a lot of calculations involved in terms of figuring out the cost for your specific recipe, your labor costs, your packaging costs, all those sort of things, and then figuring out how to add all these other inside costs of using channel partners, and then it'll help you figure out what to charge a wholesale distributor as well as what to charge a retail grocer. And it'll show you what retail to the consumer you would land at. So, you know, definitely please take a look at those.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess that will be it for this presentation.
Sounds great. Thank you.